Ontario and Saskatchewan. And really, we all have that same vision to make sure consumers have factual information about their food and how it's grown, to make sure that consumers can make more confident decisions when it comes to food. We do have some partners with respect to today's presentation, and for the rest of the winter series, we'd like to thank the Canadian Agriculture Partnership and Canola Eat Well for making this possible. The intent around this speaker series is to continue the conversation around food. And as everybody knows, Dr. Hughes is going to be our first presenter in this series, but we also have Joanne MacArthur, who's going to be discussing food labeling, the good, the bad, and the ugly on March the 29th, as well as Scott McDevitt, who is involved with Gordon Food Service, and he's going to be talking about the food service industry and how that industry has had to adapt in Canada due to COVID. With respect to today's presentation, I would ask that everybody keep their video and their microphones on mute so we can hear Dr. Hughes speak. And if you do have any questions, to just place your questions in the comments section, and at the end of Dr. Hughes's presentation, we'll have an opportunity to get to as many of them as possible. As mentioned, Dr. Hughes is the first in our series of 3. Dr. Hughes is Emeritus Professor of Food Marketing at Imperial College London. He's also the visiting professor at the Royal Agricultural University of the United Kingdom, and he's a very much sought after speaker at different international conferences and seminars on global food industry issues, particularly related to consumer and retail trends. And just having a chat with Dr. Hughes in the weeks previous, before COVID, he indicated that he spent majority of his time either in hotels or on planes traveling throughout the globe. Dr. Hughes has lived and worked in Europe, North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Southeast Asia. He has an extensive experience as an international advisory board member with food companies and financial service organizations on 3 different continents. So with that, I would like to stop my sharing, take it over, Dr. Hughes, and thank you very much for being a part of this.
Hang on, thank you very much, Clinton. Is everything coming through okay?
Very much so, yeah, looks good.
Good. Thanks for the introduction. And I couldn't be more delighted. It's always a particular pleasure to be talking to Canadians. I'm proudly Canadian. I don't sound as if I am, but I lived for 10 years in Canada. My children were born in Canada. So it's a particular pleasure. And I've got a great rambling presentation here. There's lots of slides. Luckily, lots of them are pictures, so they're easy to digest. And Clinton, I understand, will be available on the Farm and Food Care website, as well as, of course, the recording of my wee talk. So why don't I just get straight into it? Okie doke. Oops, off I go. There we are. First slide. Let's start global. And it's just to remind us all that, we're in a world of 7.8 billion. That's a lot of people, 7,800 million people. And there's tiny Canada at 38 million. I think we're the 2nd largest country in the world, but we have a small population, 0.5% of the global population. But what intrigues me is if we look at 2020 or 2021, that 60%, give or take, so 6 out of 10 people in our world live in Asia. And what's more, over the next, 20, 30 years, we're going to add another 2 billion people to our world. And that's something of an issue. And actually, many of them will be in Asia. But actually, the better part of 8 out of 10 people by 2050 will either be in Asia or in Africa. And it's in Africa where we're going to see the real growth of population. The African population is going to double from 1 billion to 2 billion over the next 20, 25 years. And I'm never sure if that's a great food marketing opportunity for Canada or whether it's a social problem for the world. I'm very Africa positive, lived there for 5 years working for a Canadian firm as it happens. But there may be some issues. But let me just go on. Oops. Here we go. Now, this isn't the COVID talk, but this is where we are. We've got to start somewhere. And I've got a view of the world that, we are in the middle of a pandemic, or hopefully towards the end of a pandemic, and that our experiences during the pandemic will influence how we behave and respond in a post-COVID era. And so I've taken just three examples, the UK, Canada, and China, and said, well, what's the difference in terms of this set of experiences? Here I am in the UK, actually I'm in Wales, but we've had 4 million cases of COVID-19 and 121,000 deaths, and it is continuing, and we'll probably get up to 150 before we're finished. Whereas let's sort of contrast that with Canada, where I know Canada has had a roughish time, but your death count is much, much lower. And then let's go to China, where it started, Wuhan, after all. That was the genesis of COVID-19. And look at that. Less than 90,000 cases up to now, and less than 5,000 deaths. And so it doesn't surprise me when I look what's happening in China, that essentially they're back to their new normal, which is restaurants open, walking around the streets. Yes, they wear masks, etc. But their economy, they did not go into recession, and they expect to see strong growth in the coming years. Well, that is not the case for us. And if I look at the UK, I would suggest that particularly older people, I'm in that bunch, will be pretty apprehensive about going out into the world post-COVID. Because in many cases, we know people who've suffered with the disease, and indeed, tragic though it is, we know people who've died. So moving on. Oops. Here we go. And what do I notice? That COVID-19 hasn't treated everybody the same. And actually, the people who've really taken it in the rear end have been lower wage workers. On the left, you can see in the US, for example, that the gig workers, people paid by the day or without long contracts, saw their wages, their salaries, so just fall quite sharply. Whereas from the high wage worker, the sort of more so-called professional end of the business, yes, they saw a dip in wages, but then very quickly it sort of came back up to similar levels as in 2019. So there are the haves and the have-nots. On the right-hand side, what does that show? It shows in the UK that over the last year, household savings have rocketed up for some people. And again, for those who were in a position where they're fully employed throughout COVID-19, throughout the lockdown, their costs were down because they weren't commuting, they weren't on expensive holidays, so they've amassed cash. So there are the haves and the have-nots, and I think that's really significant because it's the have-nots that will drive food retail prices in Canada and in the UK, because supermarkets will respond to that crisis-driven, cash-poor group in Canada, and you'll see big price wars between the major supermarkets. And we know from a farming and food point of view, that will mean a squeeze on our margins. Moving on. Oh, good. Here we go. And what's more, I think this is sort of shocking, really. I mean, it's both the UK and the US. If you look at the degree to which there is food insecurity in our countries, and we're rich countries, and exactly the same has happened in Canada too. We've seen this tragic upward move in terms of those who are reliant on getting food from the public purse, if you will. In the US, for example, the better part of 35 million people are taking food from food banks or indeed receiving free groceries. It's sort of shocking in many respects. Oops. And so what happened during COVID? And it's still happening now. There is those who won and those who lost. Well, certainly from a food industry point of view, major food retailers just had a very respectable time. Why? In many cases and in many countries, we were like almost forced. There we are, locked in our homes, and we were forced to buy through the major supermarkets of this world. And their sales just went through the roof. In Canada, all around the world. And what's more, increasingly, we turn to actually buying online. Canada actually pre-COVID was slow to embrace online grocery shopping. It was much faster in the UK, but actually the real leaders in this world in terms of online grocery is China, South Korea, and Asian countries in general, particularly the higher income Asian countries. And so what? Well, that has an impact on what we buy. I'll come on to that in a minute. Here we go. Who did badly? Well, we know food service. So the restaurant trade, small cafes, it was being devastating in almost every country, down the plug hole, as I say here. And also it hit farmers in many countries that were focusing specifically on the food service industry. If you were selling your milk into coffee companies, for example, then suddenly, the Starbucks of this world, then suddenly you found your sales had gone through the floor. Just shocking. Although in general, through COVID-19, I would suggest that agriculture and food has had a more respectable COVID-19. Why is that? Because around the world, we still, if we have the money, are eating more or less 3 times a day, whereas other sectors, other industry have been totally devastated. For example, travel, international travel, and airlines. Okay, so we've had our restaurants closed. Does that mean sort of bye-bye eating out? Well, no, we've seen this acceleration of alternative ways of getting food on our table. And I'll take this as my first example, which is the astonishing growth of online delivery platforms. In Canada, the one that I know the best actually is Skip the Dishes. I know it operates well in the prairies. Who owns Skip the Dishes? Is it a Canadian company? Well, it was. Actually, it came out of Saskatchewan. But then it was purchased by Just Eat, which is a Dutch and UK company, and it's in 20 different countries. If I look to the US, there are 3 companies, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub, which is owned by Just Eat, which owns Skip the Dishes, that has 90% of the market for online restaurant delivery, 90% plus. And I see that right round the world. It's not just in North America, not just in Europe. And also, I mean, again, alternative routes to the consumer. Here's an example, is the so-called meal kit business. I mean, really, meal kits are relatively new. If we went back 5 years ago, then meal kits would be completely novel. But if we take a company like HelloFresh, which is very active in Canada, where does it come from? It's a German company. It has a market capitalization. The market values this company at 13 billion US dollars. And as I say, it's active right across Europe, North America, etc. And it's so that consumers are purchasing the meal essentially, but then they have to do the cooking. And again, will this be sustained going forward? Well, I think so, because what am I seeing? That the likes of Nestle is far and away the largest food company in our world, is deciding we better be in prepared meal service, and they bought in the US Freshly to compete with HelloFresh, and what's more, paid the better part of $1 billion for it. In my own market, we've had alternatives to buying the meal, but actually through supermarkets, and had it for years. And I thought I'd just throw this one in. It's not long since we've been through Valentine's Day. And here's Marks and Spencer's, which is a premium food and clothing retailer in the UK. And for Valentine's Day, their dine-in meal was that you could get delivered to you, or you could pick up at the door of a Marks and Spencer's, essentially a Valentine's Day meal, which comprised of starting with a shrimp cocktail, then a main course, which might be sirloin steaks with, say, a salad, then a dessert, which might be profiteroles, then chockies, so chocolates for you and your loved one, and then a full bottle of Prosecco. And what did we pay for that? 35 bucks Canadian per couple. That's a good deal. In Canada, you might pay 35 bucks for the bottle of Prosecco, for goodness sake. So so remember, there was a time when we used to buy, you might forget the word, ingredients. Do you remember the word ingredients? We'd go and shop in supermarkets and buy things that we've then put together to a meal. Now, increasingly, we buy the meal. And what I notice this is my last sort of COVID-related slide, is that COVID-19 has either accelerated trends or in some cases decelerated trends. And when I use this slide here, which looks a bit complicated, but it's not, I'm saying, let's look at work, shop, play, health, trade, and travel, and then work out through COVID, and we're going through it now, and we're going to be going through it all year, I would suggest. What's the impact been at work? Well, we do more work at home, and there's more home snacking and more home meal preparation. And also, if we go out, we might go to the local retail, just around the food to go, outlet just around the corner. We shop online more. We tend to buy from local suppliers more. Funnily enough, we buy more frozen food than we did in the past because we find that convenient. Now it's delivered to us if we're buying online, and then we can put it straight in the freezer, and we find that it's less food waste, for example. What are we doing at play? Well, it's more home entertainment. We tend to eat out in. Yes, we go to our restaurant, but we have the restaurant send the meal to us using one of those meal delivery platforms. And then we might have a big night in where let's have the movie and we'll sit around and what's more, buy again online the sort of snacks that we would have bought if we'd gone to the movie in some shopping mall or other. What about health? We say we're eating healthily, but I'm not quite sure about that. And we say we're doing home exercises. Some are, some aren't. What I would expect to see on health is much more government regulation on health and the environment. I'll come on to that. Travel, well, we're not doing any. And when we do, it will tend to be more home holidays, staycation, as it's called, rather than international travel for the moment. What are we doing less at? Less at the office. So there's less urban food to go. We're doing less work socializing, which is devastating for pubs. We're not using shopping malls. We're doing less shopping overall. We're less frequent shopping. For some, household income is less, and therefore we're looking for cheap, the real deal. On the other hand, a whole proportion of people actually are cash rich, and they're quite happy to buy premium foods. Less out of home eating, of course, less international trade. So you've got to, depending on the company, you've got to look at the less and more and say, how does that affect my company? Okay, I put this in just in the last minute because it had sort of amused me. Can you imagine 2019 if you were in the steam vacuum cleaning business and you'd have looked at sales in 2019 and said, no growth over 2018. What do you think it's going to be in 2020? And very probably the board would say, no growth. We're just going to have to hang on to the sales we've got. And then suddenly you get COVID-19 and we become safety obsessed, and steam vacuum cleaning sales go through the roof. Okay, out of COVID, and certainly a sort of mega trend that has been accelerated through COVID-19 is, for me, probably the biggest issue that we have to handle for the remainder of this century, and that relates to climate change. And there's this whole notion of climate-friendly or planet-friendly diets are starting to gain substantial traction, and a good job too. Who's it driven by? Well, not least by your children, or in my case, my grandchildren, for goodness sake. There we've got this Swedish 18-year-old Greta Thunberg, who's enormously influential. She's also enormously irritating, but that's another matter. But she's sure as hell she can get attention, and right too. I note that Bill Gates, with his new book out last week, is How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, is right into planet-friendly diets too. And who are these people supported by? Well, the UN, for goodness sake. The UN is saying we need to move towards a more plant-based diet form of eating. And in the UK, for example, and this is in many countries, and indeed even in Canada, where departments of health are saying we should cut meat and dairy intake for both personal health and and certainly for environmental reasons. And if we look at departments of health, I mean, if I take Canada's food guide, I know that from a farm perspective, people, particularly if you're in livestock and dairy, it's most uncomfortable. Eat well, live well. I mean, you've got to search pretty hard to find red meat on the Canadian side. And what does it say about our liquids? Make water your drink of choice. And essentially, that's what our Eat Well guide in the UK says. But what's my point on health? There's unequivocal evidence that obesity and diabetes increase, particularly associated with viruses. And I think this will increase government pressure on citizens to eat less and to eat much more healthily and to exercise more. And we will see more regulation on health issues related to food. We're moving on from nudging to actually taxing food. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And let me just step back now. Let's look at, it makes me comfortable because we're talking about the US and not Canada or the UK. But if we take adult obesity rates in the US, and let's go all the way back to 1990. And there's the picture, there's the map. And what I see is that most states are either aquamarine or blue. And that means that obesity, BMI for adults is sort of pretty respectable. And that's in 1990. Now, I'll just go up by 5 years. Oops, 5 years, sorry. There we are in 1995. Oh dear, it's getting a little greener, which means up to 20% of obese adults. 2000, suddenly a little yellower, which is up to 25%. Here's 2005, distinctly orange, which is up to 30% obese adults. Let's go to 2010, whoopsie, that looks like a donut year. We've got red and purple, where the purple is 35% plus of all adults are clinically obese. 2010, what about 2015? Whoops, it's starting to look redder and more purple. Now I'll do it by the year. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, now we have 12 states where BMI is essentially 35% and plus. What do you think it would be in 2020? I don't have the data for that, but I bet it's more purple because I think people tended to put weight on when they were locked down, not lose weights. They said they wanted to lose weight, they never did. And so what's all that about? I put this in because I know there's health and nutrition dietitians are interested in my talk. I hope you are anyway. And what sort of shocks me is if I look at what's happened to a bagel over the last 20 years. Well, it's doubled in size. It was about 3 inches in diameter. Now you've got to, carry it in a cart. What about the percentage of daily calories consumed away from home? They've doubled too. And the number of calories we get from snacks have doubled. Now, that doesn't just explain why the obesity rates have increased, but it helps explain that. And we have, isn't it a tragedy in our world that on the right-hand side, as I say, I'm very Africa positive, but there you've got this sort of combination of most or many adults are overweight and many children are underweight. It's tragic, and that is a sort of global issue that we all have to help solve, I would suggest. Okay, so what do I think is coming out of this? Look, the US has got an international reputation for being on the large side, but then, Canadians and Brits and Australians and Kiwis are not sylph-like, as we know. And what I see in the UK is that government's saying now, we have to move on from nudging and trying to get people to eat more healthily to actually be just more aggressive. And so we're starting to see, for example, banning junk food promotions in the UK. Down the bottom end of this slide is what's happening in Latin America, initially in Chile, and then moving to Mexico, where there are drastic anti-obesity measures to cut sugary drink sales, for example. But also, if you look at the signs on all food products, which are a requirement, whether they're in excess calories, excess sugar, excess, what have we got here? Excess saturated fat, etc. So I think the food industry is going to be pounded and there'll be much more regulation in this area. Good thing, I would say. But we know that food nutrition, it's complex. I popped this in because it's a lovely Canadian company called Love Good Fats. And it's, it's a new company, but it's becoming very successful. Fat is back, that it's trying to get that message across that there are good fats and there are bad fats. And that's an issue and that's a challenge for the industry. And every year one sees now increasingly influential major research studies. This one is the Eat Lancet Commission, which came out last year. And what it's doing is looking at foods that we eat on two dimensions: its environmental impact and its health, personal health, human health impact. And this really irritates many people in the farming industry, not least those who are in livestock and dairying again, and in many cases for good reason. Because who are perceived to be the devil? Well, it's unprocessed red meat, and particularly processed red meat. You know, salami will kill you, so they say. And who are the angels? Well, of course, it's fruit and vegetables. Eggs somewhere in the middle, and dairy too. But so it's for the food industry, we've got to, this is a challenge. We have to, first of all, look at the science and make our case, because often the case that's been made is not necessarily based on science. Again, this is about 2 weeks ago. Plant-based diets crucial, and this is Chatham House and a UN report. So it's plant-based diets crucial to saving global wildlife, says a report. Very influential report here, and they're suggesting we need to change diets. Whenever you see that, it's sort of code for reduce meat and dairy and more plant-based. They're saying change diets, leave more land for nature, and farm more sustainably. I'll come back to that in a minute. So just quickly, I'm going to take a little look at the plant-based phenomenon because it's become hugely fashionable. But before I do that, just quickly, what's happened to meat consumption on a per capita basis in Canada? Actually, relatively little. It's pretty flat. Yet if you read the media, you tend to think that meat is in cataclysmic decline from a consumer point of view. That isn't the case. It's pretty stable. Beef has struggled over the last 40 years, but in the last few years, it's stable. And actually, chicken consistently grows. What is slightly concerning is it seems that we're eating about the same amount of meat and more plant-based, which probably isn't good news for our weight line. But this sort of plant-based stuff, it is a phenomenon. Here we are with Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, the two largest American companies that are in the vanguard, if you will, of this. And they've taken $1 billion of venture capital out of the market to develop their businesses in the last 18 months. That's astonishing. And what's more, it's not just a silly North American thing or American thing. It's a global thing. I see this everywhere I go. I, in fact, haven't traveled, of course, in 2020, but prior in 2019, I'd often be in China. And what do I see? I mean, even the Colonel has gone plant-based in China, as indeed he has in the US. So this is a global thing. And the biggest food companies are roaring into it. If we take Unilever, for example, which they've decided that over the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to have $1 billion worth of sales from plant-based, if you will, fake meat and or dairy type products. Their ice creams are vegan and based on something other than milk. And they've purchased and developed a brilliant company out of the Netherlands called the Vegetarian Butcher. Here he is, the butcher of the future, as they say. It's been hugely successful. And what's more, I'm saying particularly to farm groups, look what we need to learn from the butcher of the future. Because here we are. Here's a slide which is on the left-hand side. This is how we present meat in a UK supermarket, but actually it could be in a Canadian supermarket. It could be Loblaws. Tesco, which is our Loblaws equivalent. Medium beef roasting joint with basting fat. Tesco beef brisket, Tesco silverside roast joint. Anybody under the age of 40 hasn't got a clue what that's about. And a lot of people under the age of 30 are sort of concerned because the food products look like nasty traffic accidents. Whereas on the right-hand side, you've got the Vegetarian Butcher, which is sort of playing with names, which are a little bit naughty, you know, Little Willies, What the Cluck, Unbelievable Burger, Little Peckers, etc. And that they're sort of consumer driven, whereas I'm afraid still in fresh meat, we tend to be supply push oriented. And what's more, coming up on meat, more sort of fanciful, if you will, and probably not in my professional lifetime, we can grow meat from cells and then printed. And here's from Israel, Aleph Farms unveiling their thicker cut cultivated ribeye steak, which they've grown in the lab, and then they've printed with the 3D printer down the bottom end there. But what concerns me in livestock and meat is not so much this sort of so-called fake meat, because it will find a place over time, but it will be very slow to edge into the market. But I can see, for example, we can grow leather now. And once that gets full commercial scale, then it will just sort of leak profitability in the overall livestock and meat industry, because you'll be able to grow leather, which is perfect, no brand on it, if you see what I mean. So we've seen this sort of plant powerhouse, and here is the oat powerhouse. So we've got Alpro, which is owned by Danone, Nestle Carnation Milk, for goodness sake, if ever there was an iconic product. And what's it made from? Oats. We've got Mars milkshakes and Galaxy and Bounty milkshakes, again, made from oats. It's astonishing. And every day, this is what, a week ago, here's Nestle launching its vegan Kit Kat. For goodness sake, there is so much excitement in the market here. What should we do in Canada? Well, we're part of that excitement, but it also gives us enormous opportunities. Here's a great starting, it's not new, but a Canadian, but a Saskatchewan company, 3 farmers, which has just got some extra investment to produce some of their brilliant snacks from products which they've grown on the farm in Saskatchewan. So these are packaged lentils and chickpea products, doing really well. They're very fashionable, and they'll continue to be so. And what I've noticed as I look around the world of food is that big food, these very big companies that were suffering pre-COVID because their products looked old-fashioned, actually they did well in 2020 because we tended to revert back to them because we knew and we could remember the brand names, and we wanted something that we could trust. And they're now tending to link with smaller companies that they buy a little bit of, and if they're successful, then they buy the lot of, who seem to be quicker on their feet. So here's General Mills, a huge food company, linking with Good Belly, a company that they own a little bit of, and then eventually they bought the lot. Same here, Mars bought a small amount of Kind, a sort of healthy, so-called healthy snack bar maker, and they've just purchased the rest of it. Same for Mondelez, which owns Cadbury's. They've just bought a chocolate bar maker, Hu. So these big companies are joining, just purchasing the little guys. It was ever this. And so how long can we go with plant-based? This sort of amused me to see Reebok. And what have they got? They've got a plant-based sneaker coming out soon. And what's more, it's pushed by who by? It's pushed by the wonderful Formula One driver, Hamilton, who is a sort of, well, he's a great sports person, but also has the attention of many young people. And he's a vegan. And what's more, so is his dog. I always feel sorry for, there's his dog, Roscoe, his British bulldog. And Roscoe, I bet he doesn't like being a vegan, but that's another matter. Moving on. So now I'm in the enviro end. And the fact of the matter is that eco-actives globally are increasing in their numbers. And if I'm looking at these global figures here, that 20% of our globe are eco-active, that they will change their purchasing behavior to buy the more eco-friendly products. 40% of people are still eco-dismissers, but that's going down. Eco-actives are going up. And what's more, I would expect to see in the next 2 years that the market will force for all food products, I would suggest, to have an Enviro score on front of pack. It's already happening. Here's Oatly, oat milk, if you will. Dairy farmers hate that phrase, where they'll put the carbon impact on the front. Corn, which is a mycoprotein, again, which mimics meat, particularly chicken, has its carbon impact. There's a supermarket in Sweden where the goods are priced on the basis of their carbon emissions. And I'm saying to everybody in the food industry, look at your product and work out what your Enviro score is going to be. And will that be helpful? Will that be positive? Or will that be a challenge for you? It's already happening in the US. Panera Bread and Chipotle, which are sort of fast casual dining places when they're opening, already in the menus, they have the carbon count. And what's more, consumers think food and drink manufacturers are most responsible for environmental issues, particularly for packaging, I would suggest. And so we've seen this sort of revolution in packaging over the last 1-2 years. It's accelerated through COVID. Here's PepsiCo ensuring next year that they have 100% recycled plastic bottles. And they have digital watermarks on their product so that it can be more easily sorted by industrial scale packaging sorters. This was just products that I saw over the last month in the UK paper wine bottles, Absolute vodka in a paper bottle, McDonald's in Brazil with their trays made from food waste, Smarties, the confectionery, going paper on the confectionaries. And so I think for all food companies, what we've got to do is say, we've got to challenge ourselves and say, what are we going to do in terms of reducing our environmental impact? And here's Nespresso, which is Nestle, of course. So they've made a promise to be carbon neutral by 2022. They explain the journey to their consumers, to shoppers. They report on their progress, and then they will deliver on their promise by next year, I'm sure. Okay, so what I find intriguing is that eating is just becoming more complex because there are social pressures dictating choice. Remind me again what we can't eat. Anything with palm oil as an ingredient, because what about the orangutans in Borneo? Chicken and eggs fed soy from Brazil, fish that isn't sustainably sourced, any meat or milk with hormones and antibiotics, food produced with slave labor, crops that are grown with too much water, eggs produced by hens in cages, beef that's destroyed the Amazon, anything in a non-recyclable pack. And so post-COVID in particular, you've got to look at what are the major social issues which will disturb growth in my food and drink markets, depending where one is. And what's more, particularly on animal welfare, there's only one direction of travel, and that's going up. This is Waitrose, a premium retailer in the UK, and they've just put out a pioneering mobile app which measures emotional well-being of animals. Yes, at Waitrose, they say, we put welfare first. We always want to do better, which is why we're trialing an app to measure how farm animals are feeling. Really? Well, yes. And the bar is going up. The green bar is going up. And I can see it wherever I look. For example, I was working last year with Barilla, the great Italian pasta maker, and they've taken all palm oil out of their products, out of their cookies, and replaced it, good to hear, with canola. Marks and Spencer's have got milk which has no soy in the dairy feed. The World Wildlife Fund is saying, if you're buying pork or chicken, make sure the soy that was fed to the hogs was not purchased from farms from Brazil that were associated with deforestation. And here's Unilever just unveiling their deforestation-free supply chain promise. There's a real move for big food to become increasingly and very actively green. And Unilever is leading the charge here. It's promised, this is within the last month really, has promised a living wage across the full value chain of all its products. So take tea, for example. So tea will be grown in India. It ends up as being, say, a Unilever branded tea product. But they're saying, we want whoever's picking the tea in India to be on not the minimum wage, but the living wage, which will be higher than the minimum wage. So this is one of the biggest food companies being very active on social issues. And I think the challenge for all of us in the food industry is to make sure, do we understand where our consumers are coming from, who are driving this? And this I've taken from the Canadian Public Trust Research, which I think is very effective. It's simple. When it comes to building trust, it's best to connect through shared values. You've got to understand the values of your customers, and are your values, your business values, in tune with theirs? we'd like to think, and farmers in particular, and those in the food industry would like to think that consumers think on the basis of scientific facts. No, they don't. It's much more visceral. It's about emotions. And sometimes that's very challenging. Okay, I'll have to accelerate through. Just give me another 5 minutes, if you will. Go on, 8 minutes. Go on, give me 8 minutes. That I just want to pick up some other trends. But before I do that, I want to remind you all that consumers always talk about health. Yes, we want to buy healthy food products. Well, they do. But actually, convenience and often price too trumps health. Taste, convenience, price will trump health. And I put this slide in because here's mac and cheese, and its ingredients are on the right-hand side. Well, you know, I've read shorter books than that list of ingredients, yet still in the championship, the last one that I was looking in 2020, the classic mac and cheese from Kraft won the crown. Why? Because it was the nicest tasting and it was also convenient. What other consumer trends do I notice? Transparency triumphs. People want to know, where did the ingredients come from? Who grew them? How did they grow them? Plant forward is all about plant-based. Tailored to fit, increasingly, we want products that are tailored to fit me specifically, not just everyone. It's all about omni-channel eating, which is we want to eat wherever we want to eat, whenever we want to eat. And that's really challenging for the food industry. And on health, it's particularly with regard to our immune health. And I'll come on to that quickly. So consumers want supply chains which are traceable and transparent. It gives them reassurance of quality and safety. And we're seeing that it's revolutionizing as to be able to see right down quite complex supply chains for cocoa and for coffee, for example, all the way back to the small scale farmer. Here we are, Danone in France with its yogurts, where does the fruit come from? We'll show you exactly where it comes from in France in this particular case. I love this. This is Austrian cheese. And what's cheese made of? Well, milk. Well, not this one. It's made from 100% mountain farmer hay milk, which makes the difference. And that also makes the profit. The margin is in the adjectives, mountain farmer hay, not in milk itself. And then, as I mentioned, personalized nutrition. Increasingly, we're looking for technology here. So there'll be techno gizmos that help us get better understanding of our bodies. I'm not sure if nutritionists like this or dietitians, but you know, it seems the fact there are techno whizzes out there and they love all this stuff. And I see food products arriving at pace. Here we are in China with customized drinks, Nestle's Nesquino. And so it's either a smoothie, a milkshake, or an oat shake. And then you add the superfood stuff into it that is particularly good for you. Also, we start to see, I'm rather sensitive about this, given that I'm not in the first flush of use, by the way. And here we've got Daily Gut and Brain, which is a product which is aimed particularly at the older consumer. But I remind people in the food industry, you've got to be pretty careful selling special food to old folk, because lots of old folk don't think they're old folk, me included. But as I mentioned, actually, immunity and immune health has been the biggest push through COVID-19. And for good reason. Here's 54% of global consumers say that due to COVID-19, they've spent time educating themselves on ingredients and procedures that can boost their immune health. And the food industry has responded to that. So if we take Actimel, which is a Danone product, what have they got there? It's drinkable yogurt for the immune system. We've got Tetley, you know, as in tea, but that's their fruit teas for the immune system. And here we are with a muesli mix, but it's an immune mill seed breakfast boost. And also it's been about stress too, reducing stress. Recently, I've been working with PepsiCo and they'd launch Driftwell, which is a canned drink for the caffeinated masses to get better sleep with its new relaxation drink. I've just put my choice. I'm quite sure Driftwell is a lovely option, but my choice, which I'll have when I've finished talking with you guys, is to have a bottle of Bishop's Finger strong ale. And that certainly helps me relax and go to sleep. But there we go. And again, if I look, what intrigues me, if I look at the food competitions that I see around the world, I've just picked one from the UK, which was for 2020 New Product Awards. And here's a sort of spread of the ones that won prizes. But I'm picking up what are the elements that start the sort of link to the food trends. It's about fiber. Vegan is extraordinarily fashionable. They are something free. That could be dairy free, it could be fat free, it could be sugar free. Oats, which is great for the prairies, I would suggest, sort of brilliant, that it's a great ingredient. Nostalgic products are doing well. Of course, home baking has done particularly well, and products which are indulgent. And now, almost done now, but as I move towards the end, what intrigues me, as I mentioned earlier, that the Unilevers, the Danones of this world, increasingly are focusing on social issues because they know they need to be in tune with these issues if they're able to connect with their customers. But actually, the leaders often in social issues are small startup companies. So here, for example, Jenny's Ice Cream, where what's she doing? It's a 100% of all profits will benefit She Should Run. This was to encourage women to run for office, political office in the US. Ice cream for breakfast day. That seems a good idea. Or here we go with This Saved Lives. That's the brand name of the product. And if you buy their food products, then every time you make a purchase, the company sends a packet of life-saving foods to a child in need. So that's become extraordinarily fashionable, and I think it's particularly good news. And as I said, the big food companies are into it. Here's Danone, one of the largest food companies in the world, from France originally, but it's everywhere. And it's announced it's becoming a entreprise à mission, a company whose purpose and objectives in the social and environmental fields is set out in its articles of association. And annually, Danone's performance will be measured by an independent auditor on consumer health and nutrition, water, agriculture, biodiversity, packaging, etc. And I think agriculture is changing. This is my last run in here. We know it has to change. This is linked to climate change, that we need to have healthier diets, which will be lower impact diets, whatever that is. We need to consume less in many cases. We need lower rates of waste. We've got to remember that a third of most food is wasted in richer countries because we throw it away. And a third of food is wasted in emerging countries because it goes off before it reaches the consumer. We have to limit losses. We have to tread more lightly on our planet. It's really, really important. And we have to use resources responsibly, not just spray them willy-nilly. And what I notice is that big food companies are now want to have more and stronger relationships with those that produce their primary ingredients, that is the farmers. And so we see this burst of interest in regenerative agriculture, and it's become hugely fashionable, and it'll be with us to stay. And essentially what's happening in agriculture is that we're using modern technology, and we need to do that if you're going to feed an extra 2 billion people over the next 30 years. But we've got to use it in a kind way, using practices that we're very familiar with, or our fathers and mothers and grandparents used in agriculture 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. Okay. And I see that right across Canada too. I put in McCain here because it's a great Canadian company, and they are making huge investments in sustainable agriculture with their potato farmers. As I mentioned, PepsiCo, who I've been working with, doing exactly the same. So that's my lot. I've got no quick summary, no time for that, but I do hope you've got some questions for me, and I'd be delighted to answer them. And I hope you've all stayed in the room and haven't sneaked off.
Well, actually, the room grew, so that's a good thing. I want to thank you very much for the presentation. We do have some time for questions here. Please post them in the comments section. We do have a few here that I think I'm just going to go through for you, and feel free to take your screen off share, and then people get a bigger picture of you. But one thing it's actually came up in the news here in Canada just in the last little bit around the dairy industry, and you had mentioned palm oil. So it is a practice for some dairy farmers to use palm oil in an effort to increase fat content within the cow's milk. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. And this came from Rosie.
Right. Okay. Remember, I'm not a dairy farmer, and what do I know? I'm just sort of, you know, some random emeritus professor. I would think that customers, that a proportion of consumers would not be happy with that, and that it can do damage to the image. That, you know, that the dairy farming in Canada it's a great sector, and you've got a decent story, but that will be problematic. I've seen it being a problem in New Zealand, for example, where they were doing exactly the same, using palm oil byproducts. And I often work in New Zealand and say, don't do it. In their particular case, they're saying it's all about free range milk. Well, you know, palm oil feed is not about free range milk. So I'd be very careful about doing that.
Okay, excellent. One of the other questions came from Brian, indicating you did a lot of talking around the efforts to improve the health of global citizens. Do you feel more regulations will help achieve this, or is there other ways, just with some of the trade-offs that exist with the economy and people's own personal choices?
Yeah, I mean, my point is, I mean, I'm not a great one for regulation. However, I mean, if you look in mature social democracies like Canada, like the UK, that in history what we've done is on health is say, excuse me, would you mind eating a little more healthily? And largely we've been ignored. And then what's happened, as the level of problem, as the cost, for example, of diabetes rises, as the cost of health, of the health service because of COVID-19 rises, and we know that if you are diabetic and overweight, that you're more likely to be hurt with COVID-19, that governments are saying, hang on, we've got to move on from nudging here. And actually, we have to go in with a big stick. And sometimes it's just, even by saying you're going to regulate, that you will push the food industry to do something that they should have done 5 years previously, like reduce sugar, for example. And not wait until they're threatened. And I would just expect it, I don't necessarily like it, but I would expect to see direct taxation, you know, on sugar, on salt, on issues and areas where you can actually count the health costs. And in some cases, I mean, I think in Canada too, you say, we just can't afford it. You know, if you look at that, the cost of obesity, and if it's linked to diabetic related diseases, you know, we can't just say, please, could you eat a little healthier? We've got to do more than that. And I think you're going to see that writ large. And we're certainly seeing it already in Mexico and Latin America, where it's a huge problem. I mean, in Mexico, they just don't have the tax base to be able to afford to treat people. And because Mexicans, next to the US, are the largest people in the known world.
Excellent. And I do want to say there were a few comments that came up whether or not this was being recorded. Not only is it being recorded, but we do have Dr. Hughes' presentation that will be PDF'd and available on our websites afterwards as well. So you talked a lot about it, especially initially around how COVID has kind of changed some of the trends. And Joanne just brings up here that there's so many families that have returned to the kitchen, doing baking, cooking and stuff like that. And it's made it a little bit more cost effective for the families. And she's just wondering, and I kind of agree with this too, is this a trend that will continue for some to avoid going out or to getting that food in the future in a post-COVID world? Because I even see for my family, because we're not playing in hockey games anymore during the wintertime, we're making a lot more of our meals here at home. And I'm just, is it going to be similar to other families across the globe?
Look, it's been hugely influential. You lock people inside for the better part of a year, and they're going to learn a little bit more about home cooking. And there's nothing wrong with that, I might tell you. And I think really importantly, in many cases, they've expanded their repertoire. Prior they've got about 8 dishes that you can do, but you can get away with that when you're eating out 2 or 3 times a week. But if you've been doing the 8 dishes for 9 months, then eventually the family gets pretty sick of it. So what I think is going to happen, that I think there'll be more home cooking, but not necessarily just from, it's not scratch cooking as your mother would have known it. Increasingly, what people will do is buy meal components and then they bolt them together, and I've been home cooking. It's a lovely story about sourdough bread and banana bread, but that will tail off. I tell you. Unfortunately for Robin Hood, who must have been sort of thinking, we never thought we'd be selling that amount of flour in those iconic yellow packages. It's right. So yes, we'll see more home cooking, but remember what I said, that convenience trumps so much that people say, yes, we want to do more home cooking, but it's home cooking as they know it, and it's not as your mother and grandmother knew it. So there's this push towards convenience, and then don't underestimate. Say back to skip the dishes, etc. That's hugely influential. Just quickly, the last time I was in Canada was in January in 2020, just before COVID-19, so last year, about a year ago. And I was in a downtown hotel in Edmonton when it was -35 outside. And what sort of intrigued me was that I was in the reception of the hotel, and there was about 40 people all sitting waiting for something. And I wondered what they were waiting for. And they were waiting for skip the dishes guys to arrive with their favorite restaurant meal. And I thought, wow, I wonder what the hotel thinks. I mean, the hotel restaurant was empty. And that's so easy to do now. And as we go back to work, but the fact of the matter is we will work more from home, and that means we'll cook more from home. That's good news for eggs, for example, because we'll have more breakfast at home. And if didn't you say you've got a little bit of an egg?
We have an egg farm, so yeah, that's great for
good on you.
This country. We have time for one more question, and then we'll probably have to wrap this up.
Oh, boo, I've come a long way.
You even took out the flag too, so that's great. Just a question from a farmer that has a market garden, a U-pick operation. He's just indicating we've seen such a huge increase in the number of local people that are willing to pay extra for this local produced product. Do you feel that will be a trend post-COVID as well?
Yeah, it's. I think that was pre-COVID too, and it will be certainly post-COVID. But don't just rest on your laurels. You've got to give people a good reason. It depends. Of course, you can deliver it to them. You can make it available in farmers markets, or you can attract them into the farm. Next week, I'm talking at the UK Farm Retail Shop Association. And partly what I'll be saying is, here's an opportunity to create theatre, to give people good reasons to come out to see you, and to spend the morning there and end up purchasing some of your products, but at the same time doing things that they wouldn't, maybe doing exercise on the farm. Why wouldn't you have
yoga?
Yeah, let's have a 6-kilometer walk for the really fit, and then a 3-kilometer one for the lesser fits. So no, I think it's a great opportunity, and to use use your social media with the local market to show that you've got something to offer. That's really, really important. It's a good opportunity.
Yeah. I do want to take this opportunity to thank you. I wish we had another 30 minutes to go through this, because I think there's a lot more thought-provoking questions that come out, and I think this really helps those who are listening just get a better grasp of what's happening, not only in Canada, but for the rest of the world, in terms of some of these different trends and how we can use them in our own businesses and make our own decisions as well. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be part of this, and definitely agree that this has been an excellent presentation. I do want to say for everybody listening too, we do have a survey that's going to be coming out later on. If you take the time to put that out, not only does it help us kind of evaluate things for the speaker series, but I've been told we are giving out prizes for people who vote. So I don't know what those prizes are, but I'm sure they're excellent and worth your time to fill out. As mentioned before, we do have 2 more presentations on March the 26th and April 22nd. Feel free to check out our resources on farmfoodcare.org or canadianfoodfocus.org. And again, thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much, Dr. Hughes, for being a part of our first presentation.
Clinton, can I just say thank you to you, and also to anybody who took the time to listen in. It's been just a real pleasure for me, and I wish you well. Keep safe. We're almost there. Those vaccines are they're helping. I've had my first one, and I'm waiting for the second.
Excellent. I wish you all the best too in the UK and Wales right now too. Okay.
I'm going for my bishop's finger now. Remember, it's gone 7.
All the best, Dr. Hughes. See you later.